What's up, everybody? Jack here, another episode of The Big and Bold. Today's episode is pretty fun. I'm going to be talking about the best over-unders for you to hammer in college football this season. These are the over-unders I'm looking at. They're the over-unders you should be looking at. Let's get right into it. Let's talk about it. I'm not saying bet the mortgage on these, bet responsibly, but these are the ones I like, and I like them a lot. I'm going to explain why. First one I want to get into is Arkansas. So I think people are a little scared off by Arkansas because they're in the SEC. They're historically not the best program out there. But they're coming in at a 7.5 over-under at plus 140 odds to go over, according to FanDuel. I love it. I mean, they broke this over-under last year, going 8-4 in the regular season. We've got them here at that 7.5. Looking at their schedule, I mean, I know people see Cincinnati, they see Alabama, and they get scared off. But hear me out. Cincinnati replaces everything. Starting quarterback, running back, number one wide receiver, both of their starting corners, their leading tackler. They replace everybody from that roster. And they've got to go to Arkansas's backyard to play this game. I don't think that looks good for Cincinnati. I think they're going to beat South Carolina. They're going to beat Missouri State. I don't think they beat Texas A&M 2 years in a row, and I don't think they beat Alabama. Anything can happen. But that's okay, right? At Mississippi State, at BYU, as long as they win one of those two games, they still have a good shot of hitting this 8-4. Because they come off their bye week to play an Auburn team that I do think Arkansas is the better of the two teams. They get Liberty and LSU and Ole Miss all at home. LSU's got a new head coach. Liberty's got to replace Malik Willis. Ole Miss has a whole bunch of changes to their roster. They're going to be a boom or bust team this year, in my opinion. Last season, Arkansas went on the road to play Ole Miss and lost 52-51. Nearly had the 2-point conversion at the end of the game to win it. Then they go to Missouri. So, I mean, in order to hit that 8-4, let's say they do lose to Texas A&M and they do lose to Alabama and they lose to BYU. And that's if they lose to BYU. Then they still get to come off that bye week, and they have another, slap on their wrist to still hit the 8-4 that they need for you to get this over/under. I think 8-4 is a floor for them. 10-2 is probably their ceiling. So I'm going to hammer this, over 7.5 at plus 140 odds on Arkansas. They arguably got better from last year. KJ Jefferson at quarterback returns. He was their leading rusher as well. They still have Dominique Johnson and Raheem Sanders at running back. They've got a couple studs on defense. And in terms of, they utilize the transfer portal well. They lost Traylon Burks at wide receiver to the NFL, but you bring in Jaden Hazelwood at wide receiver, the transfer from Oklahoma, former 4th-ranked player in the country. So he started to come into his own last year for Oklahoma. Now he's at Arkansas. They got Landon Jackson, former 4-star at a high school, transferred over from LSU, coming in off the edge. I definitely think that Arkansas is going to hit that 7.5. Move over to another team sitting there with over 7.5 plus 140 odds. It's the Iowa Hawkeyes. They were a 10-2 team last season, and they actually lead the Big Ten in returning production, and yet we get them at a 7.5. You look at their schedule, they're going to start off 3-0, probably 4-0. You got South Dakota State, Iowa State, who they don't lose to, Nevada, and then they go to Rutgers. Now that game in New Jersey against Rutgers is going to determine quite a lot for their season. Rutgers could be a sneaky good team this year, as in like 5 or 6 wins instead of like 2 or 3 wins. But I still think Iowa's the better team. They're going to have one of the best defenses in the Big Ten. They get Illinois as well before that bye week. So I don't think they're going to beat Michigan, even if it is at home. But getting that game at home does help. So it's entirely possible they start off 5-1. I mean, who else are they going to lose to in those first 6 games other than Michigan? So at the very least, I could see them going 5-1. They got to play the Buckeyes on the road off their bye week, but they get Northwestern at home. At Purdue's not easy, but they get Wisconsin and Nebraska at home with Minnesota sandwiched in between. So as I said, 5-1 really feels like that's in the cards for them. And then Northwestern feels like a win. At that point, you got to go 2-2 in your last 4 to hit that 8-4 that we're looking for to get the over 7.5. I think that's more than reasonable between Purdue, Minnesota. Wisconsin's quarterback position is a mess. Nebraska, I'm going to talk about Nebraska in a minute, but yes, their passing offense is not good, but it really never has been. It certainly wasn't last year, and they still managed to go 10-2. So I don't think they're going to do that well, but I don't think they're going to do as poorly as 7-5 either. Return a guy like Jack Campbell at linebacker, had 140 tackles last year for Iowa. Dude was an absolute stud, and he decided to come back for his senior season. So I'm definitely in on Iowa over the 7.5. But the next one is Michigan. So Michigan, you get the returning Big Ten champs, went 11-1 last year, coming in at a 9.5 win over under at plus 110 odds. I love that over. Their schedule is very, very favorable for them. Not only do they get an easy, 4, 5, 6 wins to start the year, but pretty much every team of concern they play at home up until the final game of the season. They're going to start off 4-0. At Iowa's not great. They murdered Iowa last year, but that was last year, right? Going to Kinnick Stadium is not great, but Michigan is obviously the better team. It would just be upset alert going to Kinnick Stadium. You get to Indiana. Michigan doesn't lose to Indiana outside of 2020, which was a crazy season. You get Penn State at home. You get Michigan State off of a bye week at home. Huge revenge game for the Wolverines. At Rutgers, Nebraska. If it was a road game like it was last year, I'd be more concerned, but they get it at home. Illinois at home. Then you go to Ohio State. So, the way I look at it, yeah, could I see them losing to Iowa and Ohio State? Sure. Could I see them getting, some major upset to maybe Nebraska and then losing to Ohio State at the end of the year? Absolutely. But 10-2 is a floor for them. 11-1 is probably their ceiling. So taking the over is easy for me. Now, yes, they replaced some important pieces from last year. Hassan Haskins, but they still probably have the best running back room in the Big Ten. Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. They replaced a lot of starters on defense, but it is a well-recruited defense. So I'm in on Michigan. Their offensive line probably got better. They've got a stacked wide receiving room. And best case scenario, J.J. McCarthy comes out and he's a stud at quarterback, or you roll with Cade McNamara, who, they went 12-2 last year with him. So final Big Ten team I'm going to talk about. You got Nebraska. Now, Nebraska is coming in with a 7.5 win over under. I'm actually tempted to take the under at 7.5. And I know that there's, these predictions out there saying, Nebraska's going to go 9-3, 10-2. We haven't even seen them go 6-6 under Scott Frost. It would actually be a decent season for them if they went 7-5. This is asking them to go 8-4. So I'm a little skeptical of that. Their schedule, I can see how it would work out for them when you look at their schedule. Northwestern in Dublin, Ireland, probably winning that game. North Dakota State, Georgia Southern, all at home. They'll probably start off 3-0. Oklahoma is at home. If they're going to win it, it would be this year. They played a lot of close games last year, but they've played a lot of close games in general under Scott Frost. It was just a ridiculous amount of one-score games last season. They had like 8 one-score losses last year. But Oklahoma's still a better team. You get to play Indiana at home and then 2 Rutgers after the bye week. And then at Purdue, I'd be skeptical if they beat Purdue, to be honest with you. They get Illinois. That seems like a good win. I can absolutely put them at 6 wins. Between Northwestern, North Dakota State, Georgia Southern, Indiana, Rutgers, Illinois. But getting 2 more wins on this schedule might be a little tough. You're talking about upsetting Oklahoma, beating Purdue, and then you've still got this gauntlet at the end of the year of Minnesota, at Michigan, Wisconsin, and at Iowa. I don't think they're better than those last 4 teams, to be honest with you. We've seen Minnesota be a 10-win team, having a prolific offense. We're projecting Nebraska to get somewhere close to that. Casey Thompson, transfer from Texas at quarterback. Last year, Casey Thompson, he had moments of brilliance, right? He had 16 touchdowns to 2 interceptions last year between Texas Tech, Oklahoma, and Kansas. But then you look at his other games last season and you're talking about 8 touchdowns to 8 interceptions or 7 interceptions. He had a lot of bright moments and a lot of dull moments. Kind of reminds me of Adrian Martinez, who's been the starting quarterback in Nebraska for some time. He transferred out of the program. Nebraska's going to be a decent team. I could see them pushing for 7. It's hard for me to see them getting to 8. It's possible, totally possible. Don't bet your mortgage on under 7.5 for Nebraska, but at plus 120 odds, for a team that we haven't seen do it under Scott Frost, with a difficult schedule, playing 5 or 6 teams that I don't think they're as talented as, it's hard for me to see them getting 7 wins. Or I should say 8 wins. Next team we're going to talk about, and again, this one might ruffle some feathers, but we got Notre Dame. And they have an 8.5 over-under, which isn't bad. That's, over at 9-3, under at 8-4. It's actually a little lower than I thought it would be coming in. I expected them maybe at 9.5. But you look at their schedule, and it is absolutely disgusting. Starting the year off at Ohio State, you go to North Carolina, you play BYU in Las Vegas, which I think is hilarious. You got to play Stanford at home, Clemson at home, to USC. That right there is 6 games that I'd be sweating if I'm a if I'm a Notre Dame fan. I think you'd be lucky to win 2 of those games, personally. And that right there, you've already killed this over-under at 8.5. If they lose, 4 out of those 6. Between USC, Clemson, Stanford, BYU, North Carolina, and Ohio State. And don't get me wrong, Stanford and North Carolina are not great teams. Stanford last year in particular had a rough season, but they're actually a pretty talented team. And, we've seen them succeed in, recent years. So they're probably due for a bounce back. I'd be very hesitant to bet an over at 8.5 for Notre Dame, because you're asking them to go 9-3 to hit that over versus an under of 8.5 at plus 120 odds. I don't think they're better than Ohio State or USC. I don't think they're better than Clemson. I don't think they're better than even BYU. If they lose those 4 games, even if they go 3-1 in those 4 games, you're still talking about Stanford and North Carolina. You still got to play a decent Boston College team. Their schedule is an absolute gauntlet. I don't know how many studs they have on their roster. They have a lot of new pieces in, like Tyler Buckner at quarterback, Chris Tyree at running back, a little unproven at wide receiver. I love the Brandon Joseph addition in the transfer portal at safety from Northwestern, but I'm very skeptical about the success that they can have with first-year head coach Marcus Freeman. So I'm just saying watch out. If you're thinking over on Notre Dame, I'd actually be willing to take the under there. Another team that might surprise some people, I've got Miami, and they have an over-under of 8.5. So again, you're asking them to go 9-3 to hit that over. And I actually like the under at plus 100 odds for them to go 8-4 or worse. And let me explain here, because a lot of people like Miami. They got Mario Cristobal at head coach, coming from Oregon. Tyler Van Dyke at quarterback. Had a really strong year last year. But you look at their schedule, I can hit 5 or 6, maybe 7. I had 7 wins for Miami. Cookman, Southern Miss, Middle Tennessee. They'll probably split North Carolina and Virginia Tech. They'll beat Duke. Between Virginia, which is a road game, they have a very good quarterback in Brendan Armstrong there at Virginia, and a new head coach. Florida State and Georgia Tech, I could see them getting 1 to 2 wins in between those 3 games. Then they got to go to Clemson. Don't think they're beating Clemson. They got Pitt at home, who replaces their 2 most important pieces on their team at quarterback and wide receiver. I could totally hit 8 wins there. If that happens, I could see 8 wins. But at an over-under of 8.5, you're asking them to go 9-3 on that over? I don't know if I see that. I don't know if they're walking out of the schedule with only losses to, say, Texas A&M, Clemson, and Virginia. Because I like Virginia Tech, who has a very good new head coach in there from Penn State. North Carolina is a sneaky good team. Their defense is incredibly well recruited. They got to replace Sam Howell, but they have a 4-star out of North Carolina to replace him. Florida State could surprise some people this year and be a competent 6 or 7 win team. So I'm just a little skeptical about Miami going, 9-3. Mario Cristobal didn't even do that his first year at Oregon. He went 8-4. They're probably going to have some defensive struggles this season. Their offensive line is not at a place where it needs to be. But I digress. Moving on to our next team, Arizona State. Now, Arizona State is funny. They were an 8-win team last year. They have a very good head coach, very well-respected head coach. But the transfer portal decimated this team more than I think any other team in the country. And the real concern for them is replacing Jaden Daniels at quarterback. He, had his moments last year as a passer. He struggled at times as a passer last year. Great runner, though. He was going to provide some continuity at quarterback and help keep this team together. He transfers to LSU. They've got, the transfer portal can be good and can be bad, right? You can look at a team like Michigan State, who last year utilized the transfer portal perfectly. But there are plenty of examples where the transfer portal, you don't want to rely on it, because typically putting that many new pieces into your team, it might not mesh all that well. And that is probably going to be the case for Arizona State. They have come under scrutiny from the NCAA in investigations. Their team is full of transfer portal additions. Emory Jones was wildly inconsistent for Florida. I'm not a big Emory Jones fan myself. I prefer Jaden Daniels. And you look at their schedule, they've got a non-conference against Oklahoma State on the road. You got to play Utah at USC and against Washington, who's got a new head coach, talented team. You got to go to Stanford. Colorado's beatable. You got UCLA at least at home. To Washington State, who's got a new head coach. I could absolutely see them hitting 5 wins, but at an over-under of 5.5, ask them to go 6-6. I'd be willing to bet the under at plus 125 odds for a team that has been decimated by the transfer portal, because I don't think that they're coming out on the winning end of this transfer portal shuffle of all these pieces coming in and all these pieces going out. So needless to say, those are the over-under I really like. I'll give you a sneak peek of a sneaky good team to hit on. I think over 7.5 at plus 115 for Purdue, by the way. That's a little, I know nobody follows Purdue, but give their schedule a look-see, right? Like, I know they played Penn State at home first game of the season, but they're probably going to start off 4-0. I do think they're going to beat Penn State. I think they can beat Maryland. I think between Minnesota, Nebraska, and Wisconsin, and Iowa, they can get upwards of 2 wins out of that. Better than Illinois, Northwestern, and Indiana. So, I mean, right there, I can see them going 8-4, 9-3. I'm very bullish on Purdue this year. Aiden O'Connell is back for another season. He had a very good year last year. So that's a little bonus for you. Maybe look at that over 7.5 at plus 115 for Purdue. But needless to say, thank you for watching, everybody. I really like making this video. We get to get into some sports betting. We get to talk about some of these teams and the expectations I have for them. So if I discuss the under for your team, I apologize. It's nothing personal. It's just what I see for them this season. And if I discuss the over on your favorite team or your school, then you're welcome. But again, thanks for listening, everybody. Have a good one.